My name is Mahmoud Abaza. Welcome to Career Curiosity today, and I'm here with one of the most influential people in the city. And I have to be honest with you. I have to be Kristine Hubbard. We're very happy to have you. I am so excited to hear all the stories that you've gone through. So to start off with, just give us a little introduction of who you are, what you do.
As you said, my name's Kristine Hubbard. My official title is Operations Manager with Beck Taxi, but I hold a few titles: mother, wife, boss's daughter. So it's yeah, as you say, we've got a lot of things that we can talk about. I don't think you want to hear all the stories. I don't think you have time for that.
Honestly, no, we have lots of time. Honestly, I honestly don't mind at all because you know what? The one thing is, nobody said to any of your competitors why. Nobody talked to you. Nobody sat with you guys and kind of like sat on the table, try to listen to the stories. I mean, it was a great when Uber and Lyft came out, and everybody was excited as a consumer. We're kind of talking from the consumer perspective. Everybody was excited from the technology, and some of the drivers were so happy and optimistic and stuff. And now, actually, after a few years, you see the real problems, right? You see all the real problems come out, right?
Who could have predicted? I mean, my gosh.
That's true. One of the things I'd like to know, when did so you guys have been operating for a long time, since what years you've been operating in Beck Taxi, and then
More than
what
50 years.
more than 50 years. So more than 50 years you've been in this industry. At the same time, you have when did Uber and Lyft, or let's say Uber, I think Uber was the one that struck into Canada first, or Toronto specifically first.
Well, I'll tell you, I was in San Francisco in 2011. We
Okay.
already were in the process of discussing and designing our own app.
Okay.
During that trip, which was coincidentally enough a taxi convention, it was the first I was attending. But
Okay.
San Francisco was interesting to me because I had heard about this new thing that was going on. But when I got to the convention, not a single word was mentioned. No one was looking for it. And we're in this convention hall in this hotel. And my husband was with me actually. Again, it's the first time I'm at a taxi convention. First time my husband is, traveling with me on a work trip.
Yeah.
And we look
Yeah.
at the window and I'm going, what's happening? Why are people getting picked up in strangers' cars down there? Hi, everybody. Is anyone seeing this? Like, does anyone want to talk about it? So we knew right there that our industry as a whole did not have it on their radar, which was a little bit concerned. Well, more than a little bit concerning. But I also, in that moment, recognized the attraction of a city like Toronto for something like this. But I also knew that we had more than enough taxis. So there was this a little bit of a difference between San Francisco and Toronto. In San Francisco, you can't hail or couldn't hail a taxi um, easily. There was a lack of supply there.
Okay.
So Uber launched, I think, right away with Uber X, which was these private hire cars.
Yeah.
In Toronto, we had an oversupply of taxis. So it seemed to me, it doesn't make sense for them to bring their private vehicles, but one thing we do want to do right away is get that app out. And so
Okay.
we did that. We launched in, I think it was April of 2012, and then Uber landed in Toronto in September of 2012.
So same
And
year, like same year you launched,
same year, yeah.
Uber came.
And but they came as a taxi company, so that's the part that's different.
Okay.
Uber introduced itself to our industry as a taxi company, but saying to taxi drivers, we're not a taxi company, but just download the app and we'll supplement your income. We'll just give you a couple extra rides here and there, which is dispatching, which is exactly what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but somehow, people are like, oh, so you're not a taxi company. You just do all the same stuff, but we're okay with taking you at face value. And, we'll just start picking up these extra trips. And so the drivers that participated in doing that essentially gave Uber their client list for Toronto.
Okay. Okay.
And yeah, so basically everybody was using the app to get into taxis. They thought, oh, this cool new app, whatever. The good news was, and I will say, our app was released in April. We had 200,000 downloads, within a couple of months for a local app that we, were not in a position to heavily invest in, especially not knowing how many people would use it, how the drivers would respond. We couldn't have an 82-year-old driver downloading an app who's never participated in any kind of technology like that before. So we had to make sure we were going to design something that brought everyone along with us. So with Uber, it was like, hey, we've got this flashy new thing, sign up. For us, we were already working with thousands of people who were in their comfort zone with a two-way radio. And and some technological improvements, GPS and all that was already there. But, at the same time as we're trying to take these steps to ensure that we're not alienating anyone that we're working with, they were enlisting taxi drivers saying, hey guys, this is just for some extra money. Next thing you know, 2 years later, they've taken all of those clients that have downloaded the app that had always used taxis. And now, hey guys, you guys want some of our, newer, cleaner cars and nicer drivers? And those taxi drivers just said goodbye to all of those clients who were using taxis. They handed them over to Uber on a silver platter. And so that was to watch that happen. And that was before it was really affecting us at all. To watch that happen, to see how a company could abuse and use people like that was actually gross. And the worst part was that our city allowed it to happen.
And like when we talk about Canada in general, and I'm just I know that everything here that is done or touched or anything that's on Canadian soil is pretty much regulated in some way, shape, or form, right?
100%.
So how did this kind of fly without I'm sure they got regulation, and I'm sure that they did, but there's something that's and I'm not going to say they must have done something that's pretty different, and they used it.
They presented themselves as different, which confused our politicians and confused our regulators. And the interesting thing about it is, in the United States, as an example, most of those companies own all of the taxis and hire the drivers. So there is a different type of business model. In Toronto, we don't own the taxis. Just like Uber. The taxi drivers own their own cars.
Okay.
It's simply a platform for dispatch and marketing. So Beck Taxi and Uber do the exact same thing. So the fact that it was difficult for us to communicate that to our city was bananas crazy to me.
Of course. And you have to know something also. Anticipation has to do a lot with what happened. You know what? Honestly, I think nobody just saw, so I when I went to school in 2007, 2008, it was all about the hardware and computers and all that. And then 2009, I remember the iPhone came up. And I think in 2011, 2012, 2010, around that time, apps started to become boom. And I honestly did not know that Uber was in California when you were in California for that summit. I did not know that. And so it was that way ahead of time.
We flew home and I was like, get that app going. So it was, and it's been madness ever since, because, developing an app is nothing, actually. An app is the easiest thing to make on earth. But when you have to connect it to a complete nervous system, essentially, that is our total dispatch end to end, the apps are appendages. There's this whole body of work that had to be done in terms of being able. So that's the difference too. Our job is to accommodate people. Uber's job is, you don't have a credit card and you don't have a smartphone, you can't use our service. Can you imagine if we said that? Can you imagine? Sorry.
I think it will affect a huge market percentage, at least here. Yeah.
Well, not to mention a human rights issue.
That's true. Yeah, that's the biggest issue, I guess. See, that's the thing about your perspective on things, that the way, because you've been doing this for a long time, and you guys have been doing it for a long time, and nobody from, I don't know what, in the city of Toronto, nobody when you guys were lobbying the deal or Uber was lobbying, how come nobody from the politicians said, well, this is not something that's going to be overnight, or they saw it as the permanent solutions to get rid of some problem, but that problem was only temporary?
They didn't realize it was a problem until they had let it continue to be a problem. And so I'll tell you, the first time I spoke to one of our regulators was in 2012.
Okay.
And this is my favorite thing too. We're in the city of Toronto, and they call an overhaul of our regulations. They're taking the taxi industry and they're going to bring it into the 20th century. And I'm like, yes, thank you. Let's do that. But at the same time, don't you think we should be talking about this company that's dispatching illegally to taxis? Because that's all they were doing at that time.
Yeah, of
They
course.
said
It's just like nothing is regulated at that point, right?
the license that we've had in good standing for 50 years,
Yeah.
following all the rules that are required every year. How is this company here dispatching to taxis without the license that I have? And so when we went to City Hall for our first consultation about what they were going to be talking about in this overhaul, did not include one point about Uber or apps or anything like that. And I said to our executive director at the time, and I don't mind saying who that was, her name was Tracy Cook,
Yeah.
at the table that day, I said, are we going to talk about this company that's basically doing my job without the license? Like, I mean, I'm not sure. If a taxi rolls up without a plate or insurance, you guys have a tow truck on it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So her response to me was, this is the best. Her response was, Kristine, I thought I understood that you supported taxi drivers. I thought you want them to make money. Why would you oppose something that helps them make a little extra cash? And so I said to the people at the table at the moment, I said, if you think that a company is coming into your system and using it without abiding by your rules, what do you think their plan is? And let me fast forward you to, or even give you a history lesson now about San Francisco, how they're not even dispatching to taxis and it's all done in private hire vehicles.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. That's not going to happen here. 2
Yeah.
years later, UberX launches.
Yeah, and that's one thing because I'll be honest, I didn't know about Uber maybe till 2014, 2015, and because
Well,
we
because
didn't know
that's
about it till I came to Toronto. To be honest, like I heard about it in Calgary, but the service wasn't available due to City of Calgary, making sure that things get regulated before they launch. And same with Halifax, same with other provinces. So I'm not sure of Ontario really of what happened. But I also think like we are adopting very much the technology here in Ontario. You know what I mean? Like the city, and it's very it's very adaptive to new things, new ideas, new technology, new security, new this, new that. But that what we don't get, and that's the short sight of just being humans, whether what we do on a daily basis, that we are not envisioned to the long run or the long term
yeah.
of a plan. So those decisions were made because everything was just a surprise back in 2012 and 2013, the days you found out. So in 2011, when you saw this wave going, what
Mhm.
were you anticipating? You anticipated that this competition is gonna
I
like just blow off, or
Yeah. No, I was anticipating competition, and that's the misconception that has been applied to this scenario all along. That we do not compete. The reality was, my first thought is, well, let's get an app going because they're probably going to come, and we're going to blow them out of the water because we're established. We have the technology. We have the trust of the taxi drivers, and they've never let them start dispatching to private hire cars. There's no way that's going to be allowed.
yeah, was that a right or wrong anticipation at that point?
Well, I think the decision to compete is the most important. You never
Okay.
really know what you're going to be up against,
Okay.
and so I think you can't be afraid of what you don't know, but you always have to assume you don't know anything.
Yeah,
So
exactly,
you know,
exactly. And you know what? Honestly, like with smartphones and every day, how they became very, I would say sophisticated, ease of use to the
yeah,
users. And a lot of people say, that's what's making us not remember a lot of things, whether it's directions. Like honestly, in the past, think about it. When you took a cab or you went somewhere, it was about two intersections that are aligned, right? And then
right.
whether the user knew or not. Today, nobody knows. You just put the address on the GPS, and you want to go from A to B, and you don't know where it is. You might not. I've heard stories where people drive to their same day job using the GPS. So that to me was kind of funny because I think you should know the directions, especially if you're going someplace
Yeah,
48 weeks out of the 52 at least for a year.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the thing too about technology and about business in general is what you know today could completely change tomorrow. And
Yeah.
if you're not always ready for that. And especially when you're in a heavily regulated industry. That's the other thing. On the one hand, government is slow and clunky and, the opposite of technologically savvy.
And
But at
that's
the
the
same,
normal for I think it's just the norm
which can
because
hold you back.
so when Uber came to Toronto specifically, after you went to San Francisco, and they started like
Mhm.
gathering data because that's what they were doing with with
Mhm.
drivers and the industry and a regulated industry. They were just pretty much
Yeah,
fishing information. They were looking
right.
for
And
information.
that's
They were trying to
okay.
gather data, gather client lists. You know,
Yeah.
here's a way to make extra cash. And the number one thing that we all go for back in the past, I would say, a little extra money wouldn't hurt, right? And whether it did hurt, a whole industry after, and whether we saw the problems and the issues that happened from it and the theft of homes and things like that, because I don't think that would happen. And when you guys were in business, I don't think you would have the same security issues that an app would have that's just randomly hiring people just based on their license, where you do heavily like security checks for you to
Mhm.
hire people, because that's the way employment works in Canada. As an employer, you go through so much to hire people, whether it's
Mhm.
driver or someone that works in the company itself. The same thing. You go through security process. I don't think Uber or Lyft had that. Maybe today they do, but I don't think they had it in the start. It was
They
just
don't
about
have
gathering
control.
data. And you
Yeah,
said
they still
something really interesting. Sorry to cut you off.
no.
You said something interesting about technology when we talked on the phone, and I want you to say that statement again. Do you remember?
Oh,
Do
yeah,
you,
that is, well, there is a background to that, and it lends itself to the idea that we're working with people of all ages, and that's drivers and customers. And
yeah.
the last thing, and what Uber has presented itself as is technology that uses people. And what was important to me and important to our team was that we understood that we are people who are going to use technology,
Okay.
and I would never imagine, and we had to look through that lens when we're developing new features and introducing new software.
Yeah.
How is this going to affect, what is the risk that to the people who may feel alienated, but also weighing that against, we need to get this out quickly. So we had to do it in such a way that allowed people to still feel like they were able to do the work, but also make sure it was something that would be attractive or interesting to members of the public, obviously, to the riders. So yeah, people who use technology, not technology who uses people, and
People.
that's been a
Exactly.
big.
Exactly. And I love that statement. Like, this was our first conversation on the phone, and you said it. I was like, yeah, you have it perfectly well written,
You
like
know,
well written. One of the things I want to ask you about, did you learn from your competition when the competition became fierce? It became an app. It became like, oh, people are just using an app. They have a credit card. Boom, 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 boom. And it boomed fast. I think from my personal opinion, I think it boomed fast. How did you deal with that wave? Because that would have been like a tsunami coming to you.
no,
And
it didn't feel that way at all. Actually, it was interesting because I was here, yeah, in 2012 when they launched,
okay,
and so these conversations were already happening. And while members of the public were not necessarily aware of it, they were working really hard to place themselves in our city. But again, that's okay. New companies in an industry, that's important.
yeah,
And it's always been the way. We have many, Beck Taxi was the little company. We were the small East End, 25 cars, where the big companies would send drivers, oh, go work with, at Beck Taxi for a while, learn the ropes, and then we'll let you come here.
okay,
Yeah, so this hasn't been nothing happens overnight.
okay,
But at the same time, though, I will say the tsunami was the sort of shock and dismay at this idea that when you work in a regulated industry, and this goes for any company or any person, the only thing that you should be able to count, the only thing you have to be able to count on, is that everyone working in that industry doing the same jobs have to follow the same rules.
yeah,
And no matter what company you're working in, and Beck Taxi for a long time, my mother ran this company. I won't even, try to say that it's anything other than a man's world. This
It
business
is,
is still,
and you know what? Like that's one of the other things. Like you are someone that is working in a very heavily male industry. Like it's. So I don't know how you do it, and you've got kids, and you've got a
yeah,
family to run, and you've got a
dogs and
company to
kittens.
run, and the tsunami. So it would have been
Yeah,
like so many years of so much pressure on you personally, and you still like
yeah. I
kept
think I
going,
lost.
and you kept going positive. And one thing I really respect about you, Christine, is you never said, no, I don't want Uber in this city or I don't want Lyft.
No, I
Because
never
I'm
said
sure other companies would have done that. But you, on the other hand, you went on live television and I've seen it. It was a 4 minute clip on
that.
CP24. You didn't say,
Yeah,
no, I don't want the competition. No, you're like, I want the competition, but I want them to
yeah,
follow the same rules that we do. And
yeah.
that's basically
You
what you
can't
said.
even call it competition if it's not fair. It's not a competition,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. You can't accuse anyone of not competing if the rules given to one competitor are completely a free for all, while you put 100,000 constraints on the other competitor. That's not a competition, and that
Yeah.
was that was the part I think, you know, learning about how much of a lack of knowledge our own city, like they own this taxi industry. That's the part that is mind boggling. The city of Toronto owns the city's taxis.
Yeah.
They declare it regularly. But the fact that they had absolutely no idea how that system worked,
Yeah.
and so, that to me was, yeah,
Mind
I was
boggling.
baffled.
It
I was
was
baffled.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
And
think
here's the, sorry, go ahead.
no, I just think that happens, and I was gonna say, you know, we've just worked really hard to grow this business and to develop relationships and to be a meaningful partner in this community. And so the thing that ends up happening is you end up having your head down a lot. You're getting to work and then you sort of lift up and you look around. And this is what I mean about a regulated industry. You should be able to put your head up, and maybe you don't know what everybody else is doing. You don't know all that's going on, but you know that everyone who's doing it is following the same rules as you. And that
Exactly.
was the thing that I learned about Uber. So you were asking me if I had learned anything from Uber.
Yeah.
I would say I learned a lot about what not to do
Okay.
from that company.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
learned a lot. Yeah, I learned a lot about. Okay, well, that's crazy, Or what it did too? It actually validated a lot of things that we were already doing. Personal connection, maintaining that human element, you know, having sort of a community that works together than people making multi billions versus nothing,
Yeah.
and having no contact there. Taxi drivers were clear pretty on if they had to pay the fees to us that they would have paid to Uber on a full time basis, they wouldn't have made any money.
Of course.
So,
There's no way. I honestly like, okay, so I was unemployed for some time and I thought about driving Uber.
mhm,
Last year, just before the pandemic, I was unemployed for 9 months.
yeah,
And I remember I was just like, I was going to do the paperwork and go for it. And I saw the rates, and I just something didn't fly with me. That you know what I mean? I felt that I was just going to be working, but I'm not going to make the same money as an employee,
no,
nor am I profiting anything. And I'm not, it might work for other people. It might work but for me personally, it didn't work. And
mhm,
yes, and the hype of it was great. I think when it first started
mhm,
and it first came in, but I did not know that they came in that way to Toronto. I didn't know that
yeah,
they came in like, snakes,
sneaky, no,
sneaky,
yeah,
slithering, trying to get client intel, client list, all
yeah,
that. Because it reminds me
and
of the
then
movie Collateral.
yeah,
If you remember that one by Jamie Foxx and Tom Cruise.
no, I don't know that one.
That one, so he's a cab driver. He wants to open up his limo company, right? So he's
Yeah,
got these pamphlets and brochures of Mercedes Benz cars, and he wants to call it Island Limos, right?
yeah,
So and make it an experience for people in LA. LA is a big taxi congested place. Oh, in early 2000s would have been at least. And I'm sure when you gave up the numbers on television regarding the number of fleet cars versus the number of people here, is that important when you have a regulated industry? Like if let's say we have a surplus of cabs in Toronto, is that important? Like do you want like what is a like a benefit? Is it the population?
Do I think it's important to have a limited number of taxis? Is that right?
No, no, no. Like in general, like you said something on. So you when you went on TV, you said this is we have like 400 for every person, something like that. I don't
Oh, yeah.
remember exactly. So what is it? What is it that when you have a regulated industry, what is like the? Is there a certain stat that like that would be the perfect business model to have,
Yeah.
or is there anything like that for you?
Well, in terms of the number of vehicles, right? So the
Yeah,
idea behind, that sort of ratio, which is what you're talking about, a per person number of cabs per person ratio,
yeah.
um, that there's a few things that, you know, there are a few reasons for that. One is to make sure that people can get service on time.
Okay.
Another is though to make sure that the drivers are going to be able to make a meaningful living, right?
Yes, that's very
So,
important.
right. Right. So in most cities, the ratio of number of people to each taxi was about 500 to 1. So for
Okay.
every 500 people in a city, there would be one taxi.
Okay.
In Toronto, at the time that Uber arrived, ours was about one for every, sorry, the ratio, pardon me, I've got the numbers mixed up.
Okay.
Normally in a city, it's one for every 1,500 people. It's
Okay.
one taxi for every 1,500 people. And in Toronto, we had one for every 500.
Okay.
The,
So we
yeah,
had more than the normal.
way too many.
Way too
And
many.
not only, yeah, according to anyone, there have been, so, and that's the other thing I think people are missing. Uber is not the worst thing to happen to the taxi industry.
No, it's
Our
not.
own, oh yeah, our own city council, our own regulator is absolutely um, shouldn't have the privilege of participating, frankly. And this is, the more time goes on, and the more we see coming out of City Hall, the more disappointing they become. But
Yeah. But what
we,
about like the
they,
sense of community in general? Like, what about like why don't they think you're employing locals, you're employing local families. That's one thing. We're
yeah,
dealing with a pandemic that's global, right? And you're still there, and you're still there for your customers, and you're still there for your people, and that's really important, right? I think if, let's say, Uber has some economic problem in some country, they wouldn't really care about their staff
oh, no,
in
they
that
don't care.
country. You know what I mean? And
No,
that's just that difference between a large business and a medium sized to small scale business. At the end of the day, yes, we all need to survive, and I think it's a business. At the end of the day, it needs to be making its earnings, but at the same time,
but you also have to make sure that you're putting the needs of the people who are you're working with on the table. The problem here is the best example just lately is that you know our city officials and provincial officials asking Uber Eats and these app delivery companies, food delivery companies to reduce their fees, from 30% or whatever.
yeah,
That the restaurants are dying and please reduce your fees.
yeah,
The thing that doesn't make sense to me, or just establishes even more than I had already thought, is that these companies don't care about who they're making the money from, how they make it, and who goes out of business in the meantime. Where
yeah.
we've got this scenario that when the pandemic started, just before the pandemic, we were a fleet of about 1,800 vehicles.
Okay,
March 15th, we had 300 cars on the road. And frankly, didn't even know if anyone would turn out.
yeah,
So I came to work, or we came all into the office, and it was like, okay, guys, so we're an essential service, but if nobody drives, then we're not going to stay open.
yeah,
But sure enough, there were about 300 of them out there. And slowly that number has come up. But what we realized too is the demand has gone down by such a huge amount. We couldn't possibly maintain our monthly fees the way we had been.
okay,
So we have essentially been operating almost at a loss since the start of this pandemic in order to make sure that all of these small business owners, which happen to be taxi cab owners and drivers,
yeah,
make it through with us. Because
yeah,
at the end of the day, when all this is over, all anyone is going to remember is who were the good guys and who were the bad guys.
yeah.
And if I turn around when this is over and we're still here, but I can't see anyone that I knew before, something went wrong.
And you know what? It's always the general rule of thumb. We remember how people
Oh,
make us feel versus regardless. And any ending relationship between anybody, like if it's a company with the government, if it's two people, it's like just there's always I always say the dead cats come out. By people pointing fingers and you did this and you did that. But I honestly I think one of the best things that you've done, if you stuck around with your people, and I think that will pay off, not necessarily in dollars and cents and things like that, but I think it will pay off in terms of support. I think also,
Yeah.
just like what I realized from like your social media and stuff, you have a sense of community. As a company, you tend to seem to have a sense of community, and I see that you've changed
Yeah.
some of the services where you're offering some of the things that are different than normal. Like that you're offering, I guess, grocery shopping pickup
Yeah.
and things like that. And diversifying your service is really important in any business in general. But I think that's really great, and I think also at the same time. I think you guys do a lot of work. To be honest, I've taken Beck Taxi when I used to live in Calgary, and I used to come to Toronto for training or some conference or something, and we used to have the vouchers, the corporate vouchers.
Yeah.
Um, and I do kind of enjoy the sense of it. And I think with the pandemic, I think I took a cab during the pandemic, but I don't remember which brand exactly. But I like the fact that they had the shield and they had
Yeah.
everything covered. You know what I mean? The driver was wearing a mask, and I think and when you're in a private vehicle, regardless of who you are, Uber or Lyft or whatever. I think that those are not really taken into except just wearing a mask, and they tell you that the driver passed the multi-screening test or whatever. But I don't know. Like humans are humans, we will react the way we act, regardless. But I think
I think
that
too,
this
people are invested. Taxi drivers are invested in this business.
they
Like I
are.
said, every taxi is a licensed business.
It is.
So like every shop owner, like every restaurant owner, they're making the important changes in order to ensure that they're offering the safest service, not only for their passengers but for themselves. They're going home to their children. They're in this full time. And
Yep.
that's the difference. And even in Uber or Lyft's own words, oh yeah, even though we know that 50% of their drivers work full time, the other 50% of them are a couple hours here, a couple hours there. And I think, that establishes a person's investment
Yep.
in what they're doing and how it comes across in terms of the way they're serving the public.
Yeah. And the other thing is also when you converse with a person that's like in general, like the driver of a cab fleet is very different when you go on Uber, because you don't know who you're going to get with Uber. Are they trained? Are they insured? And I think probably, I don't know what years, but I'm sure insurance played a long, big ball game against Uber and Lyft to be in Canada. And I'm sure that would have been a big advantage on your side, because you already met the paperwork, you already met the licensing, you already met the insurance, you met everything, and then this company comes out with an app and then they just take over the market like that. It's not fair. It's not fair, especially when you do the work. And I think now in these years that we're in, I think people are kind of seeing the advantages of having a company that's close, a company like yours, and a person like yourself that's outspoken. And actually, one of the benefits I find is I just emailed you and I got a reply, and now we're here, we're having this conversation. So I don't think I'll ever do that with the CEO of Uber. No way. No.
Well, I will say, I mean, I think it's important, when they came, and like you said, there's a few things that you said that are reminding me about, sort of the thought process during that whole period. The fact that a company can come in and not follow any of these rules and still work. Then the city creates rules to accommodate that company that doesn't want to do all the things that we've been doing all along. And one of those items was training
Okay.
for taxi drivers. Without notice, the city of Toronto canceled their taxi driver training program. Without
Oh,
notice, the
wow.
drivers in the classes literally were told, "Okay, guys, it's canceled. Go home. You can get your
Wow.
license in a couple months going to school."
Yeah.
And we were kind of at a crossroads because, we knew that the ability to enter the market as an Uber driver, there were no barriers.
Oh yeah.
And now the city was telling us that it wasn't important to train taxi drivers, which went against not only everything they had said in the past, but everything that I believed as well.
Yeah.
And even in our own sort of industry, companies or other individuals who are associated with the industry are saying, forget it. You don't have to train them anymore. And you don't have to make sure this is happening, and you don't have to have this, and you don't have to have that. There was a long list of things that we could, oh, yeah, we can surge price, all of these opportunities
Yeah.
that were presented by a city who clearly had stopped caring, because only a couple of years before they had increased the amount of training. They had increased the environmental restrictions on vehicles. They had applied all of these changes for the better in terms of safety. But, you know, then I realized, and I didn't actually even have to think about it. I live here.
Yeah.
My kids walk to school every day.
Yeah.
My family and friends, and people are getting into taxis believing that the person who is picking them up is professional and well trained.
Yep.
And so there was no way that we were going to, even though we were going to make it even harder, even just for our company, because all the other taxi companies said they would do it too, and they didn't.
Yep.
We went to Centennial College, developed. And so while all this Uber stuff is going on, I'm going to Centennial College every day to help them, create and deliver appropriate training to make sure that people will be safe. And this is the stuff that got missed in all of the coverage and all of so we took a huge risk in doing that. We lost, the potential of new drivers who were like, oh, well, I can go drive this X company, or I can be Uber or whatever, and I don't need any training. You can't make me get trained.
Yeah.
But I'd go on our radios every day because we've still maintained those radios. As you know, communication is so huge. And now we get to use them just for that. It's not an auctioneer's mic anymore the way it used to be. We have electronic trip dispatch, but now we get to say, hey, everybody, how you doing today?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
things are closed, and this is going on in the city, and be careful on the roads, and make sure you have your snow tires, and all of that.
And I think that's very important. The fact that you have like let's say a huddle up on a day-to-day with your team staff or members of the company itself, and you're like, use the radio, use the tools that you have to make sure everybody's safe. I don't think that's really something where a big company would do, because it's all systems, it's all an app. If the car doesn't come, the next car will show up. But what I find is like, the person, honestly, when they come and drop off the stuff, they don't seem to be happy. There's nothing majestic about the service. Yes, it is ease of use. Honestly, as human beings, we love ease of use, convenience, and that's what we're looking for at the end of the day. But I find, and I can completely understand. They have to go through 10s and 15 orders a day to kind of make just, make ends meet. It's very hard. It's very hard. And, living in the GTA is completely different from living anywhere in Canada. I've lived in Halifax, and I've lived in Calgary, and I've lived in Toronto or the GTA, the Greater Toronto area. Honestly, this is a completely different city. I would always tell people this is a complete different ball game. Right?
It is.
Because one thing I find is, you love Calgary?
Halifax.
Halifax, yeah, it's a beautiful city. I've lived all my 20s in Halifax, Nova Scotia, so I love that city so much. It's so much. Just the quality of life there is amazing. You know what I mean? Not big. So where did you go? Like, let's just let me ask, where did you go in Halifax?
No, sorry. I just love Halifax. My husband and I go back quite often. Just to be able to wander around that city and do not much at all and enjoy their beer garden.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I just love the size.
The Maritimes has always had that vibe. Summer. I don't know if you've gone in the summer or the winters more.
Both.
Both? Okay. So summers in Halifax are fun. Summers in PEI are really fun. With Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown PEI is really fun, or Summerside PEI, and Halifax is really a lot of fun. Cape Breton Island as well is really fun if you go in the summer. Winters, I don't know winters so much, but
I did winter once. It wasn't my favorite, but my husband and I too, before we were married, did a full Cape Breton Island. We went over to Charlottetown. We yeah, it is a lot of fun, and so we always go back. Anyway, sorry, off topic,
No,
but I
no, it's
do love
fine. It's fine. This is we're trying to make it a good experience for you at the end of the day. So don't worry about it. Um, and today, like, where do you see, like, so you've seen a wave of 8 years of a lot of things change, things that came
Mhm,
against you, things that went for you, things that
mhm.
you kind of learned and experienced. Where do you see the future now with technology kind of taking over today?
Yeah.
But I think we are seeing more problems with those platforms than we are seeing solutions. So, where
Mhm.
do you see the future, and how do you plan if there's, like, because honestly, Uber for you was like a pandemic. To be
Yeah,
honest,
yeah,
Uber Lyft was for you
that's
was
a
a
little bit.
pandemic.
Yeah.
Dealing with them, and kind of, and their lobbyists, and they would have probably hired the best lawyers. Like you said in
Mhm.
a statement once about city lobbyists.
Yeah.
Oh,
Fire
well,
them
Uber
all.
doesn't really make money. You said something like that,
Yeah,
and on
yeah,
Twitter.
they live at City Hall. Their lobbyists live at City Hall, and there's like 800 contacts a month, when there's not even anything going on. And I had a counselor say to me not that long ago, you should lobby more because I don't know any of them. I've met a few here and there over the years, but no one that like I don't go there. In fact, I find myself if I go near City Hall, my shoulders just start to lift up around my ears.
Yeah,
But I was told once recently, you should lobby more. They're knocking down our door all the time. You should really be lobbying more. It's like, I have a job. I
yes,
have a job. And there are all these people that I talk to all day long who are fantastic. You think I'm going to spend my day over here wasting my breath up against a multi billion-dollar company that is, completely has been operating with impunity since they arrived? Why would I waste my time?
yeah,
I have productive things and people who I care about to spend time with.
yeah.
And that I think is the lobbying business. It's so disappointing.
It is. I mean, like, the world is getting harder. Like, that's what I find as an adult in general, and life. The world gets harder. It gets harder for everyone, for you guys as well. I'm sure it's been difficult, but I'm actually glad that you mentioned that you started seeing things coming in 2011. It's not like you were on. You're not sleeping on a pillow and just seeing and having the job, and kind of like all of a sudden this wave came. No, you actually saw the wave coming to you, and that's
Yeah,
one
our
thing that we're not aware of. We're
Mhm.
not aware of your day-to-day challenges in general. Some of the things we want to know also, like, okay, so you've handled, and I think, honest to God, you've handled a lot of things very well. You didn't panic. You didn't raise
Well,
the
I don't know
white
about
flag and gave up. And I think you're very brave and strong. And I think you actually set a true example of optimism, and how to deal with things, and how to deal with things in a proper way, not just sham whatever companies out there, or say, oh, no, 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 and be no,
Mhm.
you're very, and that's really important. So how do you do that? Like, what is your approach in general?
In life or
Yeah, in
at work.
life, in your career too. Like,
Yeah,
just
I
that, when you think about these things, you've approached them in a very professional way, and a very good way. A person, because I'm the first person to actually, not the first person, but I've always wanted to know how you guys have handled the wave, like, just as an industry, and that, because, well, to us as consumers, we thought it
Mhm.
was 2014, 2015 when Uber came out and just, like, snatched them. We didn't know the whole real story. Nobody
Yeah.
knew the real story.
I think because it was a slower start. So like you say, not everybody sort of knew exactly what was going on. Um, and it was a slower start than you thought previously. I think the hardest part throughout all of it, I feel like I take on a lot and I get stressed out and I swear sometimes.
That's yeah.
I use the middle finger emoji maybe too often. At the same time, the most difficult moments and the most sort of shocking moments for me, like one I'll never forget, and I think it was 2014. I was in a Beck taxi and I was talking to the driver, and he had paid $300,000 for his taxi license approved by the city of Toronto. And he had his camera in his car and he had done all the things he was supposed to do. And we stopped at a light and there was a private hire car pulled up beside us, and he said to me, Kristine, I come from a country where rules don't matter. And so I come to Canada, and I'm happy to follow the rules. It's expensive, but I'm happy to do it because at least I know that everyone has to follow them. And he
Yeah.
looked beside us at that car and then said, now I feel like I'm back home. And I swear, seriously, those are the moments that you kind of go, oh no, we're not going out like this. Like,
Yeah.
it's not. And if it's just, or a stranger, someone I had never met who was not affiliated with our company, but I guess because he had seen me on the news, he came to our office one day, and he was like a 75-year-old man who had spent his entire life driving taxi, who was just now starting to rent out his business, essentially hiring a manager, like anyone who owns any other business does. They hire people and they still make money because it's theirs.
Yeah.
He put in his 40 years. He bought the bait that the city put out for him, which really was at that time, it is the immigrant story. That's the other thing. I am
Yeah.
not the face of the taxi industry. I am absolutely not representing what the kind of struggles and the kind of experiences that people have had. And this man in particular, he didn't speak English when he came to Canada. He was from Greece, and he had a choice. Do I start a restaurant? Do I have a convenience store? Do I drive a taxi? And the city was telling people, take your time, put in your time, do a good job, and at the end, you'll have a viable business. And
Yeah.
it was just in this time that this man, who had since, through purchase or issuance from the city of Toronto, had, I think, 6.
Yeah.
He had 6 taxis, which by any measure is not a big business.
No. Small fleet.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
at one point, his assets, his business had value. And all of a sudden, not only was the money gone, his value was gone too. And this person, a stranger that I don't know, is sitting across from me, a man, like a big man,
Yeah.
crying, how can they do this? What are we going to do? Can you help us? And he was representing, he was one of hundreds of people in the same situation. So, like, come on, at some point, it's like, you don't even have a choice. I can't walk away. I mean, I would anyway, but.
And didn't City Hall do anything to sympathize with the drivers? Had it been something to do with I don't know, just people might have thought cab drivers were a monopoly, and that's when Uber and Lyft came in and kind of took over the market in a very, I would say, absurd way. To be honest, hearing it from you, to me, it's completely absurd. But I would like to know. Why didn't the officials that were in charge think about you guys and think about the locals and their stories and their families and their entities and that man with the 6 cars? Why did they not hear this out?
It goes back to the idea that Uber is not the worst thing that ever happened to the taxi industry. Politics is the worst thing that ever happened to the taxi industry. The lack of political will to recognize that these are people and not machines. A car does not represent the person behind the wheel. And this is, again, prompted us to more and more. And we already did this, but it was so important to us. That's when we started putting out videos this is what I do. There was one, Fitz, a driver who's since retired, and we put out a commercial on CP24, and there's a bunch of them. And he's playing dominoes with his friends, and he's talking about his daughters, and it's this very beautiful story. And at the end, he's standing beside an orange and green car, and he says, and I drive a Beck taxi, right?
Yeah.
So to try to humanize these people, because we really started to see, especially when Uber started transferring people out of taxis into private cars, was like, hey guys, we shouldn't have done that. Don't drive with a grumpy taxi driver in a dirty car. Meanwhile, 2 days ago, that was the prize, right? Oh, use us to order a taxi, right?
Yeah.
The pummeling that the morale of our industry took, on an individual level, as individual taxi drivers, these guys went, oh my gosh, what have I done? And then they looked to the city and wanted to blame the city for allowing them to take advantage of them, right?
Yeah. And they were taking advantage for so much what I would call just looking beneath your feet rather than looking ahead kind of thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. It was a very short-sighted thing, but people don't think that way in the moment. And I think it does, because my job connects me with so many different people who work in this industry,
Yeah.
whether you're a driver or, the mechanical side or the software side or the marketing side or the dispatch or call center, all of that stuff. It does give you more of a higher level view of how it all works together.
Yeah.
And when you introduce something that doesn't make sense, and doesn't fit into the plan that the city has put forward for all of us to follow,
Yeah.
it's easier to see where the problems are going to come up.
Yeah. And I honestly, like, as a user, as a consumer, we did not see that tug of war.
You didn't see that side of it at all.
We never saw the side of it. Nobody saw the side of it, because as consumers, we tend to be thinking for ourselves, and if this is convenient, we will use it. But we didn't know the whole backstory to it. And then I think people should be more aware of that. I mean, it's
Would they be, though?
the what? Sorry?
But, I think I don't. My problem is, so a lot of people in our industry took it very personally, very offended that someone would get in. You'll let your wife drive in a car with a stranger. You don't know who this guy is, and he doesn't have a camera and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And people were so upset and so offended in our business that this was going on. When, like you said, and was clear, it had nothing to do with it. It was, look, I can open this app and I can watch the little car come, and I can pay in the app and all this. Like, it just was so new. And that was Uber's brilliance. The billions of dollars that they spent in lobbying and marketing to not only boost their own shiny newness and that they were something different, but also that the taxi industry was old and dinosaur and what have you. And I think one of the things that helped us in particular, first of all, having that app included us in every conversation. So every time Uber made an announcement or every time something came up in the media, my phone would ring, or I'd get an email from whatever reporter or media outlet was covering that story. Well, hey, Kristine, what do you think about this? Well, of course,
Yeah.
But also knowing that, which was great for us. It was great, it was great marketing, frankly, for us. Every time I'm on the news, it's a Beck taxi commercial, and that there's no secret to that. But I just, and I've even almost lost my train of thought. But I think the reality of the situation is that our city, our councillors, our politicians, and not caring about those people that's probably the most lasting thing I'll take away from all of this, was that the government, whose only job was to protect the rights of the people that it was collecting all this money from, discarded them. And
had that been like changing, like the politicians, the type of politicians, younger people coming into politics and kind of making those decisions, because I'm sure, like, whether it's anybody in general, like regardless of your position in life, where you are in life, in your 20s, you don't make the same decisions as you make in your 30s, and you don't make the same decision as you make in your 40s, and so on and so forth in your 50s and 60s and 70s. So I'm just thinking, like, whether at that time the politicians that were in charge, or the city hall staff, or the councilors, whatever, they did not envision this mass destruction that was going to happen to these people.
No, they had no idea. No,
they had no idea, and they didn't care. Like, they didn't say, "Hey, Kristine, listen, we hear you. We know that you paid a lot of fees to get your cab going." You know what I mean?
So basically, what ends up happening is I come to them with a concern,
Okay,
and they weigh the potential damage of my concern, and they see, oh, well, it's just cab drivers picking up extra people, and they're just getting some extra money, so who cares? But I could see the road that led to taxi drivers not being a part of it, and a company that was building its own taxi system when the city of Toronto owned a taxi system already. So the frustration there was so intense. But by the time Uber had done all of its marketing, taxi industry's old, dinosaurs, whatever, then the public is like, new, exciting, easy, friendlier, nicer, cleaner. not realizing that the reason the drivers are so friendly and nice and whatever is because if they get a complaint, they're cut off the platform and essentially don't have a job.
Yeah.
But
It's
you know,
it's that simple. It's that simple. And
just
even
that.
if your cell phone goes missing, right?
Mhm.
I'll give you my personal experience. In Halifax, I lost a cell phone in a cab. This was way before Uber and Lyft, and probably 2011. The guy came. The driver called me, or he tried to
Mhm.
call the number that was on my phone, and that was my
Yeah,
parents' number. And then he tried. He couldn't. My parents couldn't understand him because they didn't speak good English.
yeah,
So the guy ended up going around to find the
yeah,
owner of the phone with like
yeah,
5% battery left on the phone. But I was
yeah,
glad that he came and gave me the phone. Right.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
what I find is I remember an incident with a friend of mine that went into Uber Pool, and
yeah,
he lost his cell phone and never came back.
yeah.
And
And that's the thing. Well, we're not even allowed to offer pooling services. That's the thing that is hilarious that people probably don't even know. Taxi drivers are not allowed to pick someone up and then pick someone else up and then just
it could have been a great idea. I mean, like, how many times I would
Uber.
have loved to just like share a ride with someone if it's
Mhm.
like a 40-minute ride. Or
Yeah,
let's say I would drive someone that lives close by to me, and I'll
yeah.
drive the way to work, and they can drive, especially with the GTA, given the distance and the kilometers that we cover
Mhm,
just to get
mhm.
from one spot to another. Your minimum like I don't know, going somewhere in the GTA
Yeah,
is a
just a
20 minute.
really focus. Yeah,
Minimum
oh,
is 20 minutes. Going to the
yeah,
supermarket, coming back 20 minutes. You're done.
yeah. Yeah,
That's the
everything
minimum.
takes an hour. That's what it feels like now. And that's the other side of it. Here we are, actually an interesting thing that you were talking about with the number of vehicles on the road and the ratios and all that. In 2011, during that uh, consultation process when they were going to overhaul all of the industry, 2011, 2012, the city paid $50,000 to an expert to study whether or not the city of Toronto already had enough taxis to provide good service to the public.
Okay.
No sooner does the report come back saying Toronto has more than enough taxis, did our city disregard that and greenlight Uber to flood our
And
streets
this was around the same time. Like this is
around the
happening at the
same.
same time.
Yeah,
That's strange. Like okay, so if the city nobody really complained, why are we giving more? And then we gave an opportunity for what I would say a shark to come in and take the market,
exactly.
right?
When study and like we talk about data and studies, and you hear all the time from our politicians how important it is to get the data. They had it and they disregarded it. They paid for it.
Yeah.
They disregarded it. But at the same time, members of the public were all excited and had bought into Uber's line of fun and exciting and new and easy and whatever. That by the time they were left to make the final decisions, Uber had illegally placed itself at such a high number, such a huge presence in our city. If those politicians, regardless of age or understanding or whatever, voted against what clearly people were saying they wanted, um,
Yeah.
that would have been political suicide.
Yeah.
So, right? So
Yeah.
here we are, taxi drivers, hardworking, you know, regulation, steep fees paying people who've gone through the training and are doing everything. And could there have been improvements? Absolutely. That's what I was hoping we would see out of all this.
Yeah.
Well, we've got it for taxis. Your own report says it, so let's make it better. Let's
Yeah.
do it all. Let's go over it all. I'm excited about this. But instead, nah, you know what? We don't really care about you anymore. Boom, Uber. It's
But I
like,
think like you guys provide such an essential service to society in general, regardless of what era we're in.
yeah.
Cabs are essential. Cabs
Well,
are
and
essential. Taxis are essential. You go
yeah,
out of an airport in a city that you don't know nothing about. First thing is you're
yeah,
going to take the cab. First thing,
right.
right?
Exactly.
That's the first thought. It came to me when I first arrived to Canada. I took a cab. I
Hmm.
didn't. I had zero clue when I arrived here. I arrived to Pearson
Yeah.
13 years ago. 20 years old. I've been here for 14 years. 20, 21 years old, and I don't. I was like, where do I go? Like I'm just
But
standing.
a road flight on a taxi is a universal symbol of Something that's going to get you where you need to
of
go.
of somewhat safety and
Right.
getting me from one place to another, especially if I don't know the language. Yes, it
Mhm.
can be skeptical. You know, when in other countries, I did not know about the regulation before, so I didn't know how everything went. But I think if you had like a deal on the table with the government, that deal should have stayed, and they should not have green lighted other, because I don't think other cities did that till like recently.
Yeah, in Canada. So Canada, that was my favorite part was, Toronto makes these really horrendous and they've already had to overturn a lot of the things that they said. Now they're reintroducing training. What a great idea, which of course they haven't done. Like all these things, it was like turning back the clock on history.
Yeah,
Let's go back to where we were when we decided we needed regulation. That makes sense. It's everything that technology is not like. It's the opposite of innovation. It's the opposite of moving forward. Is what they've done. In fact, is gone back in history.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
and when you think about this stuff too much, I will be very honest. It's hard to find a way forward, except if you have the human connection with the people who this matters to.
And I think that's very important. I think that is, you have just like hit the bullseye with that statement right there. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, if you run your company and run a cab company, a driver can come to you and say, "Hey, I don't feel like driving today. You know, I'm
Doesn't even
having
have
a
to be
few problems. Yeah, I'm having a few problems." You'll be very considerate, right? Versus, um, I would say just saying to them, they'd be like, "Well, we'll double up your pay right now if you go drive," because it's like, they had these
oh yeah,
surges.
please get out
Remember
there.
the
Yeah.
bonuses that they threw out at people to come and drive at this time of the day,
Mhm.
and but this was all prior to the pandemic, and the way that, like, when life was like hamster in the wheel for everybody,
Mhm.
you, me, everyone, society, and just like Monday to Friday was business, 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 and everybody's just like taking the train, taking the bus, taking a cab to go to work,
Mhm.
this, everybody, and the roads were congested. And I have to thank all your drivers for the last 11 years with dealing with Toronto's congestion, which has
I don't know how
risen.
they do it.
And
I don't
I
know how
honestly don't either. I honestly, those guys, I would give it up to them. And guys
they
and girls, regardless of who
Yeah,
we have,
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
women
no,
and men.
yeah.
Honestly, like, these guys are champions. They have
Mhm.
given us so many years of service. And yet, unfortunately, politics got in the way and kind of, put them on the shelf. Oh, it's dinosaur. It's
Mhm.
this model. We're in the new age.